Hi and welcome. This is State Senator Brian Joyce representing the Norfolk, Bristol, Plymouth District, and I'm coming at you today from Fuller Village, wonderful senior housing here in Milton. I try to bring to you some interesting guests, the folks that help shape public policy. Last week we were visited by the Governor, Deval Patrick, and this week we're fortunate enough to have a key member of his team in Greg Bialecki, the Secretary of Economic Affairs. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. Great to see you.
So one of the things that I was speaking with the Governor about when he began his administration, and you're perhaps the key player in the administration, the advent of your tenure came at the exact same time that the economy worldwide collapsed.
Yeah.
So the challenges that you've faced are perhaps greater than had been anticipated. So here's my first question. Do you like this job?
I do. I love the job, actually, and the challenge of it. It has been an enormous challenge, but it means it's exciting time because it's a time when if we do things right, we can make a real difference.
So your background, you're a Harvard undergraduate, Harvard Law School.
Yep.
How'd you end up as the Secretary of Economic Affairs?
Well, my career was in a lawyer in private practice. I did a lot of real estate development work and environmental permitting work, a lot of work that was really at the intersection of how business relates to government in regulation and permitting. And that's actually my first job with the Governor. This is my third job in Governor Patrick's first term, but I started as the permitting ombudsman for the state, a new position that you had created with others, those of you in the legislature who wanted to see Massachusetts as a better place to do business and decided that we ought to have someone based in economic development who was overseeing how our permitting and regulatory agencies were working and were they really moving at the speed of business. And so I was the first person appointed to that job, which is a great fit for what I had been doing. And then just continuing on, became the Undersecretary for Business Development and now the Secretary.
So I think when you first came on my radar, when you were the Undersecretary of Business Development, we had this life science company here in my district in Canton, a company called Organogenesis, an extraordinarily interesting, fascinating company really that manufactures, among other things, artificial skin. So this administration has this extraordinary life sciences initiative, recognizing that we're a knowledge-based economy, and to create these high-paying jobs, we need to nurture things like life sciences and clean energy. And so there was an effort to keep this company from moving out of state or indeed out of the country. And I was enlisted to support that effort and quickly found out that the proffered site was not, in fact, in my district, but was in an adjoining town. And once we straightened that out and realized that we're going to try to keep this company not just in Massachusetts, but in my district in Canton, it has been an extraordinary success story, championed, of course, by the Governor, but you've been a big part of it. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on at Organogenesis, for example?
Yeah, it was fun to visit with you and me to visit down there. I hadn't been down there in a while. It's reflective, I think, of a lot of what we're trying to do in the state. First of all, focusing on homegrown Massachusetts companies. You know, in a lot of other states, the primary emphasis of the economic development agencies is to find good companies from other states and try to bribe them or lure them to the home state that they're in. Here in Massachusetts, we have the good fortune that we got a lot of great small companies and mid-sized companies. So our primary emphasis is finding those gems, those promising small companies here, and helping them grow here and identifying what they need. It's great working with you because it's a big state, a lot of these small companies, and the Governor and I really rely on your help in identifying where those opportunities are. I think it's part of the New England culture in some way, the kind of Yankee modesty. We have some of these great companies that are doing things no one else in the world is doing.
Well, and talk about this company too. This company, it truly is fascinating where they're able to regenerate cells so as to heal wounds, for example, for burn victims or folks with diabetic ulcers, and now for in the gums and the mouth. And so this company came to the table with the state, led by you and the Governor, and the legislature involved, and we were able to listen to them I remember one of their concerns was that they were paying this so-called this clawback, this tax, throwback tax, where product that they were selling in other states would be taxed here in Massachusetts, and other states weren't doing that.
Right.
You listened, we did away with that.
Right.
And perhaps we lost some short-term revenue, but we've had a huge gain. They're
Well, we would have lost the whole company.
Would have lost
so
the whole company.
It's a debt plus, no question, right?
Now they're tripling their workforce, and the average wage at this company is in excess of $80,000. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Those are the type of jobs we're trying to grow. Let's talk about job numbers. Good news lately.
Well, it's been good. It's been a great 6 months for the state, and I hope everybody can appreciate that. You know, it's been a horrible 2 years. There's no question about it. Trends that are much beyond Massachusetts nationally and internationally. But one of the things that's very important message, I think, for Massachusetts right now is, you know, it's really almost part of our psychology that Massachusetts doesn't do well coming out of a recession. That was our history in the last two big recessions. So I think it's very important that this time is very different. We are, if you look, we clearly, in terms of employment growth, job growth, we clearly bottomed out at the end of last year. In the first 6 months of this year, we've grown more than 40,000 jobs. If we didn't add another job this year, and I'm confident we will, but if we didn't, that's still the best year of job growth since 2000, when you go back, and that was really the height of the tech boom here in Massachusetts. So that 40,000 new jobs on a percentage basis, that's the fifth best in the country.
That's terrific, and in fact, you're right in terms of both the historical perspective and what's often happened in Massachusetts, going back to the 1870s when we were, you know, whaling down in New Bedford, but more recently in the 1980s with the high-tech perimeter around Boston and 128, there was largely a reliance on one or two high-growth industries, and when that industry suffered, you know, would have a massive economic loss. It does seem that we've done a better job here in having a little bit more diverse economy.
Absolutely.
Still largely driven by our healthcare excellence, our educational excellence,
No
and
question.
again, that knowledge-based economy. Organogenesis that we were talking about came from MIT in 1985, I think. But those figures are impressive. Now, we've seen, I think in April, the largest job growth in Massachusetts.
Single month in 20 years, right?
Yeah, 17 years. I mean,
Right.
truly extraordinary.
Right.
We've not seen the depth of, we didn't have, I think, the depth of the breadth of the recession that other states had.
That is true. We actually did better. We did better than the United States as a whole on the downside, which is another thing that's not like us in Massachusetts. People are used to being, when the bad news hits, we hit worse. But what's equally exciting is we're coming out of it faster. And you're right on the money that it's a combination of two things, really. It's our mainstay industries, education and healthcare and high tech and travel and tourism are all doing very nicely. And then we also have these green shoots of the new companies, the life sciences, the clean energy company, robotics companies. And so we have, the big building blocks of our economy are very solid here, unlike in other parts of the country. And we also have a lot of nice new life as well. And we actually saw that juxtaposition today a little bit in the visits that we did. And you showed me a starting up new company, building on some experienced business people who have some great record doing business in Randolph, part of your district, but talking about a new opportunity that they're thinking about.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about that. A company in Randolph called Pura Vida, which is pretty exciting. Clearly, we're all aware of the healing power and the importance of proper hydration, but there were some staggering statistics given us that some 60 million plastic bottles end up in a landfill. I think that was that every day? I mean, it was something extraordinary.
Every day, yeah.
Every day. And then the concerns of potential carcinogens leaching from the plastics and just all kinds of environmental concerns. So this company over in Randolph is looking to have essentially purified water distilling machinery like ATM machines, except you go with your canteen and fill up with water throughout the United States, and they're looking for some seed capital. Our interest, again, continues to be to create jobs here in Massachusetts. So I brought the secretary over to meet with them and explore programs where the state can help provide some of that seed capital. I will say that I've served now under several administrations. Typically, Republicans thought to be more pro-business. I've never seen an administration as good as the Patrick administration in terms of being responsive to business opportunities, and in help nurture opportunities like this one with Pura Vida in Randolph. This other company, some of the same players down in West Bridgewater, also my district, this e-fulfillment company where they're fulfilling a lot of these orders placed online and shipping them throughout the country. So I've been pretty impressed. Now, one of the big parts of your responsibility has been helping the governor determine how to spend the federal stimulus dollars.
Yeah.
And the governor and I talked a little bit about that in my last show, how the administration had received some criticism for not spending the money fast enough. And we talked about your approach and his approach, which I think is terrific, and that is to, instead of just go out and pave every street in the state or every highway, to instead try to build infrastructure to have adjacent private growth, to leverage this public investment for private growth. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, we were held, let me just say, I think, it's been really important to us to have great partners like you in the legislature, because if you look at what we're doing, every step of the way that the governor and I have been working on, you have been consistently giving us the tools to do that. For example, I said my first job in the administration was as a permitting ombudsman, and the idea was to put somebody in economic development to be thinking about where our permitting and regulatory process making sense for business. So you created that job in '06, and I was the first one to fill it in '07. And the life sciences, the work we've done to support organogenesis, again, that was your life science initiative passed to the legislature in '08. We were tremendously helped on using the federal stimulus money from the fact that, again, you at the state level had passed a couple of new tools for us to use that for the first time put some of the state's infrastructure spending in the hands of the Secretary of Economic Development. Previously, all the infrastructure money was in the hands of the Secretary of Transportation or the Secretary of Environmental Affairs. And they're great colleagues, and they do a great job, but their focus is on their own business.
But not just great colleagues. What you've done now is, what the Patrick administration has done, the governor has done, is had the three of you and really all of you work hand in glove.
Right. What we call the development cabinet.
The development cabinet, so that the transportation secretary, Milton resident Jeff Mullen, and the Secretary of Economic Affairs and another cabinet secretary, work in concert rather than sometimes in previous administrations at cross purposes.
So we really started that collaboration back when, that was one of the first things the governor did, is establish the development cabinet and really, frankly, send the message that we should be working together and not at cross purposes. And so we really, with those funds, the More Jobs Infrastructure Fund that the legislature created, the Growth Districts Infrastructure Fund that you all had created, that was the place we began to work to work out what it meant to work together and how to be strategic and to think about how to make sure that the investments we were making were sensible additions to our public infrastructure, but also were targeted in the way that was most helpful for business. So really we had a couple years of learning and working together there, that when the stimulus money came in, it gave us the chance to say, here's some money that we didn't expect to see, but we're in a position that we could think very strategically about it. You may remember last year, there were some states who took all the money, the transportation money, went out and repaved all of their interstates as fast as they could, and then 3 or 4 months later, they were sort of celebrating that they were the smartest states of all. They had spent the money faster than anybody else. And we resisted that. We took a couple lumps for resisting that. But we said, no, we've been building this framework of thinking strategically about where to make these investments, and let's keep going in that way, and let's take we've met every federal deadline for the expenditure of money, but let's just take a little time to think about whether there are ways we could be more strategic about it. How do we balance the investment in road and bridge money versus public transit?
And sometimes you have to deal with the political realities. We had a dicey issue in Canton, where Westwood Station, there was a proposed development, a massive development, I think initially thought to be 4+ times the size of the South Shore Plaza, which was going to be on Canton's border. Some positive economic regional development for Westwood and the region, but really significant burden for the town of Canton. All the traffic was going to be so. You know, it put me in a tough situation where certainly I want to continue to promote economic development, but as an elected official, I have an obligation to protect the quality of life for the neighborhoods and the citizens that I represent. I think that over the past 1.5 years, 2 years, and I mentioned this to the governor, that your diplomatic skills would warrant consideration for the president to appoint you to solve the Middle East peace disputes. Seriously, you've done an extraordinary job. And again, the governor's listened to us. Bill Galvin and I, expressed our concerns. They've been listened to by this administration, and I'm confident that if that development goes through, and now the holdup is, I think, with the developers' financing, there's going to be some $30 million plus in infrastructure investment in the town of Canton, so as to minimize any adverse impact and to allow this regional economic development to go forward. And that's not something that could have been rushed. It had to have been done right, and I think it has been.
Yeah. Well, of course, my involvement with it, as you know, started when you invited me to come down to Canton High School auditorium, I believe.
I had over 500 people in the room.
To hear the concerns of the residents of Canton. But the question you asked me very fairly was, you as you mentioned, you're a strong supporter of economic development and job creation. You've done a lot of things to do that. But you said, I want, Greg, you to listen to the concerns of Canton residents firsthand and ask, is this being done in a way that reasonably protects the legitimate concerns of Canton and quality of life? And we took away from that the project as proposed was not doing that. And it's a very important part of the governor's strategy and my strategy, and you've been right on the same page as well, is that if we're going to promote economic development and job creation in Massachusetts, to try to do it at the expense of the quality of life in our communities or an environment is just a non-starter here in Massachusetts. And first of all, politically, it's not going to work because we have great local communities. People feel very strongly about their local communities and want to preserve the quality of life there. And we're very protective of the environment. So also it wouldn't. The reason that we are such an attractive state for business is in part because we're a great state to live in a lot of towns, and people want to live here.
It is an interesting balance because sometimes, we do have this great tradition of home rule, and every one of the 351 cities and towns is an individual fiefdom, and yet sometimes that does thwart economic development. So you can have regulations that vary. You can have one parcel of land that straddles two communities, and you have different environmental setbacks, you have different permitting requirements, different zoning requirements that make it awful difficult to develop. Another thing you've spent quite a bit of time on now, first as the permitting ombudsman, but more recently shepherding through some legislation to address this for the first time in 30 years.
Yeah, which is it's another case where we're making slow and steady progress. It's in a very challenging
It's like
subject.
herding cats, right? Getting all of the stakeholders.
It's been headed in the right direction, and a zoning. I had run a task force with a variety of participants for a couple years. We filed a piece of legislation, and as a result of that, a piece of legislation with some further changes has now gotten out of the Joint Committee on Municipalities and is on the Senate floor. So we may not be enough time in the session in the next couple of weeks to finish that, but we've made nice, steady progress on it, and I think we've raised the profile of the issue that, and you've done that with the communities in your district, that the way those processes work is going to affect whether we can attract businesses or not. It's not even a case of business incentives all the time. So when we heard, for example, visiting Organogenesis, it was great to hear they feel that Canton's treated them very well on allowing them to move at the speed of business, which is, the governor likes to say, if we can have government moving at the speed of business, that's going to make us much more attractive. And businesses have a lot of reasons to want to be here. Organogenesis was originally an MIT spin out. They love being near our great universities and teaching hospitals. They love the workforce here. So we have to, but there are aspects of our Massachusetts environment that aren't as competitive. It's a higher cost state and so forth. So we have to keep working on those things. We have a lot of reasons why businesses want to stay and grow here. There's some disadvantage, there's some challenges to doing business. We got to be constantly working at cutting down those challenges.
So some of the other challenges facing business, again, I want to reiterate, we've added jobs now, how many months in a row?
6 months in a row.
6 months in a row. So we want to keep, that's an enviable record. We want to keep that going, keep this recovery, gaining steam. One of the challenges facing business has been healthcare costs. In fact, it's a challenge facing government as well as it's facing families. But what have you done with respect to the, really together we've done with respect to the cost of healthcare on businesses, and particularly on small businesses?
Right. Well, I think you and I and the governor have all been in agreement from the beginning that thinking about what the environment is for small business is so important to this state.
Because it's small businesses that really drive the economy.
No question. That's true for the country.
Yeah.
It's even more so for Massachusetts. If you look at almost any industry sector that we're involved in, we have a disproportionate number of small businesses. The small businesses are employing most of the people across the board, even in places like manufacturing, where you might think the manufacturers would tend to be the big institutional organizations, the General Motors and so forth. But that's not true in Massachusetts. We have thousands of small manufacturers. So small business has been a key to our economy. And also the governor has a council of economic advisors, and they're all telling him that coming out of a recession, it's small businesses that are first to start hiring again, and that's where you really see the job creation on the upside. So we've been particularly focused on small businesses. You're obviously a small business owner as well, so you have firsthand knowledge of what the challenges are. And what we heard in some of the stories that you relayed to us coming out of this district for small businesses, April is the number one month for premium renewals for healthcare. So when small businesses, even the ones who saw their orders or their prospects beginning to pick up, maybe thinking about adding 1 or 2 people back on. Then they got their premium renewal notice and saw how much they're going to have to pay for health care and said, well, I'm putting hiring plans back on the shelf. So the reason the governor focused on it really is that connection, that the small businesses were saying, it's not just that we want our health care costs to go down. They're literally telling us that the healthcare premium costs were preventing them from doing the new hiring, and that new hiring is a real focus, obviously. So what the governor did is to ask you all in the legislature for some help with additional regulatory tools and statutory changes that help reduce small business healthcare costs. Not really, it hasn't been helpful to point a finger at any one person and say you are to blame for this problem. It's a multifaceted issue, and the governor's really been pursuing an idea of shared responsibility. There are things that employers can do, that insureds can do, that insurers and providers and so forth. For example, one problem is, you read about it in the paper, again recently, is people jumping in and out of the health insurance market. In other words, they're avoiding getting health insurance until they get sick or injured.
So what an insurer calls that is adverse selection.
Right, and jumping in.
So you only get insurance when you need it, when you...
Right, and being insured for 3 months and having a $5,000 operation and then jumping out again. So there's things that we've been told by the hospitals and insurers that there are changes in state law can make it harder for people to do that. It's obviously inequitable for them to be able to do it. So that's one of the things that's before you all now, that's been actually was proposed by the Senate, by you and your colleagues in the Senate. And we'll keep moving forward in addition on that legislation. And then in addition, the governor said that we have some existing regulatory authority to disapprove excessive increases in health insurance premiums for small business, and that he wanted us to begin exercising that authority in a more aggressive way. So the Commissioner of Insurance did start doing that this spring, rejecting a number of proposed premiums as being excessive, and it has really pushed the conversation, I think, and really raised the sense of urgency. Several insurers have reduced their rates, and they had originally fought the disapprovals, but they reduced their rates, and we've settled with them. But we're going to keep going. So, for example, some of the insurers are saying that it's going to be difficult for them to keep their rates down without some concessions from the healthcare providers. And we are working, Secretary Judy Bigby, who runs Health and Human Services, and I working together to say, let's identify who those providers are.
All right, one of the things I need to get better at as a host of this show with a worldwide audience is the pacing. And so we have 5 minutes left, and there's a lot I want to cover.
Yeah.
So we've seen an increase in jobs. Terrific.
Yeah.
We've had a very prudent investment of the federal stimulus dollars that we're expecting to leverage other jobs. We've made a particular investment in the life sciences, and we talk about this organogenesis that now is tripling their workforce, partly as a result of that investment we've made. We've talked about the need for reining in the healthcare costs for small business, which we're doing, and that the focus for both the administration and the legislature continues to be like a laser on job creation. The other thing we've heard from these small businesses is access to capital.
Absolutely.
So what are you doing about increasing their access to capital? We did just pass a economic development bill in the Senate. We're expecting full passage in the next 2 weeks in the legislature. Talk about that if you could.
Right. So that new economic development bill does a number of things that are going to make it easier for businesses to get help from the state for capital and advice, actually, technical assistance we're finding. And actually the business we visited, we had part of a conversation about what the state could do with capital. But as you and I heard, they had already actually...
Because here's the thing, right?
Yeah.
So a business can go to a bank and say, here's what we've done in the past 12 months, 36 months, 10 years, and the bank will lend on it. But not, here's what we expect to do in the next 12 months, 36 months, 10 years. Right. And the banks often don't lend on...
Right, you know, so the governor's focused on that growth capital. Because and the private banks, who are going to be also be lenders to these companies, in most cases where our public agencies are lending money to businesses, it's almost always alongside of private banks. But you put your finger on the issue, which is the private banks have been willing to loan to businesses based on their prior track record, but are more reluctant to loan against the future business prospects. When a business says, I'm confident that I could double my business, and the banks are saying, well, I'll give you some increase, but that kind of growth, and we've seen it. Massachusetts is such a hotbed of innovation and entrepreneurship. We were at Organogenesis, who's had, they had 100 people, and then 200, and now 300. So this is a state where, for job creation, a lot of the job is going to be created by this sort of explosive growth in small companies that have a great idea and run with it. So we're focused on that. How do we add to the capital that the private sector is providing? Really is complementary. I think that as people may have an image of, well, why would the state be loaning money to a business? They can't get money from a bank. Doesn't mean they're a bad company. As you said, it's a reason why banks have just been more conservative in lending against growth. And whereas our bigger picture is we're interested in the job creation.
In fact, you chair Mass Development. They've had a pretty good return in terms of their investments they've made. So we're right down at the wire. So you're how long in this job?
Year and a half now.
You like it?
I love it. Yeah.
You're going to stick with it?
I am.
What's your favorite part?
You know what's been great, and actually this is a great day, but I have learned more about this state in the last 3 years. It's absolutely, when you go around, as we did today, you can't help, when you go to the businesses that we were at, you can't help to be optimistic about the future of Massachusetts.
What's your least favorite part?
The least favorite part, the hardest thing for me has been, you know, I'm now managing a very large institution. My secretariat, $300 million a year budget, more than 800 people. That's very different from what I've done before. That's been a challenge.
So you like it. Sometimes the scope of it might be overwhelming. You're going to stick around the new administration?
Yep, and I'm going to be with the governor for the whole second term.
The second term.
Yeah.
Here's the single most important question of the show. Now, you've been exposed now to all 40 Massachusetts state senators. Who's the best?
You're the best.
There you go. Thanks a lot. Greg Bialecki, Secretary of Economic Affairs, been our guest, and I hope you've enjoyed it.